So yeah, just to summarize, it really did feel like they were making George a dick out of nowhere just to contrive drama like they did in the first 2 seasons, but instead it ends up being this really serious problem that the characters need to navigate and get through, and it's moving and haunting and tragic and sad. It's so good. Why did no one tell me, why did no one stress me just how good Queen Charlotte, A Bridgerton story was? I've enjoyed the first 2 seasons of Bridgerton. I recently watched them for the first time in anticipation for the 3rd season, and for what they are, I did really enjoy them. I found a lot to love for those first 2 seasons, but those first 2 seasons feel like they are good for what they are trying to be. This Queen Charlotte spin-off genuinely feels like prestige television. It's the same creative team too. I thought Shonda Rhimes was a new addition to Queen Charlotte, but she was involved in the creation of season 1 and season 2. Is it the fact that it isn't based on the books and it's just Netflix's own creation? I'm not sure. I did not expect this to be as moving as it was. I did not expect this to be as well paced as it was. Like, all the kind of notes I had in the first 2 seasons are not here for this Queen Charlotte spin-off. I have taken pros and cons lists for each season, and this season, this Queen Charlotte spin-off is literally just a table of all pros. It genuinely feels like the creators sat there and listened to all the criticisms of those first 2 seasons, and in the background, without even really announcing it, just tried to work and make it better. There was a lot of discourse in the first 2 seasons about the sort of colorblind casting and the fact that it wasn't historically accurate. People were upset because instead of making it 100% colorblind and not acknowledging it all, or full on acknowledging it and make it part of the story, they kind of took this weird middle ground where they addressed it slightly but didn't really commit to it. Whereas in Queen Charlotte, it is the central driving force and a major part of the plot and informs a lot of the characters' story arcs and motivation. The Great Experiment isn't a minor subplot here, it is the substantial driving thrust of 2 of the core relationships that are explored in this season. The show devotes serious sections to actually exploring the alternative history that the Bridgerton universe, at least in the Netflix series, has set up. I think it handles it very well, and it will be really interesting to rewatch Bridgerton season 1, season 2, and watch Bridgerton season 3, knowing everything that went on to make the Great Experiment work. Really fascinating stuff that I didn't expect to get such a thorough exploration into. When Queen Charlotte and King George aren't working as a romantic match, they literally stick to a sex schedule to make sure that they can bring in an heir, because the Great Experiment is of that much importance. I found the conversations between Queen Charlotte and Lady Danbury about how high stakes this relationship working is for the greater good of a mixed race society incredibly fascinating. I never thought watching the first 2 seasons of Bridgerton would actually try examine and explore these themes in this much depth. Another thing I love about this season is every single character, every single characterization feels strong and earned. Characters in this season that in Bridgerton season 1 and 2 felt like really kind of like whatever additions, window dressing. Both past and present versions of Lady Danbury in this season are just incredibly well realized characters. Lady Danbury in the present is so much better, so much more compelling in this season. I love her subplot. I love the whole friendship she has going on with the matriarch of the Bridgerton family. I love that whole humorous section where they're talking about the garden blooming and like reopening and reawakening their sexuality. And I love the way that their 2 stories kind of merge and twist and meet each other in different moments. It's really interesting to think about the fact that when Lady Danbury first met Violet when she was a child, she wasn't anticipating ever being friends with her in this regard, so she really didn't think through the affair and the impact it would have on their relationship in the future. And I feel like the way this show jumps between past and present is so well handled. Often in these shows, when the main plot jumps forward or backwards in time, it feels like a detour, it doesn't feel like as interesting, but here it is so fascinating to see how these characters have grown and aged and matured, and in some ways maybe they haven't. Queen Charlotte is a fascinating character because now when you watch her in the present day, you can see shades of that rebellious, spunky, young teenage girl she was when she first became royalty. Again, I just want to stress, Lady Danbury is not a character I particularly enjoyed in those first 2 seasons, but now I can't wait to see more of her knowing everything I know. I actually thought the character work they did for Violet was really substantial and really adds a lot moving forward to the Bridgerton series. I was really thankful that this spin-off didn't feel like a quick cash grab, a quick detour, an optional watch. This feels like mandatory viewing if you are watching Bridgerton. You can absolutely not skip this. You will be missing out on substantial character motivations and pieces moving forward. You gain such good insight into who Violet is as a character, and because you hear so much about her love story that that she had with her husband before he got stung by a bee. You kind of get why she's so focused on making sure that her kids actually find relationships that are built on love rather than mutual benefits, which spits in the face of how society is typically structured back then. The affair subplot with Lady Danbury and Violet's mum is something that really could have felt cheap and thrown in and like a last minute twist, but it is so well explored and adds so much to both different characters. I love the motif of the crowns he made, but I also love that the affair she has with Violet's mum is something that strengthens her relationship with her sexuality. It opens her eyes to what sex can be, and it's a crucial part of her relationship and also her disposition in the present day and why she's so keen on love and kind of being a spectator along with Queen Charlotte. I think what could have felt like a really trashy sort of like silly smutty character betrayal for Lady Danbury instead comes across as a really authentic, pure, tragic love story that could never actually eventuate. And that's a really hard line to pull off. It's very rare you can do that with so much substance and grace. Next, I just need to glaze how good the production value is in this show. I don't know where this came from. Lately, a lot of Netflix shows, even prestige Netflix shows, they've started to feel a bit cheap. You'll notice that a lot of major actors leave and only show up as cameos. The sets start to feel really clunky. This was really noticeable in Sex Education Season 4, where a lot of the sets they left, a lot of the main characters barely showed up. This was noticeable in The Crown, which really felt like it lost its budget and kind of its prestige television feel in the back end of those seasons. But here, Queen Charlotte genuinely feels like a massive HBO production. The color grading is so much better here. There are so many scenes in Bridgerton Season 1 or 2 set in the daytime that are just washed out, oversaturated, ridiculous. But here, everything is dark and gritty. The colors pop when they need to. When there's moments of beauty, it looks absolutely stunning. And everything feels like real, practical, substantial sets. I don't know how they pulled this off, but it is an absolute visual treat to behold. On top of that, the music is going absolutely off. I don't know what is going on here, because again, it is the same musical team. Previously in these first 2 seasons, some of the musical string arrangements felt cheap and thin, but here they feel epic and grand and substantial. Just watch the first episode of Queen Charlotte. Literally the first scene where she starts running around and having a panic attack for the marriage she's about to be thrust into. And the music's just going absolutely fucking off. The opening credits, if you've seen my first Bridgerton video, I talked absolute shit about how much I hate the Bridgerton opening credits. The opening credits in Queen Charlotte are fucking gorgeous. I was actually disappointed that we only got to see them in full in the first episode. Every single time they started, I'm like, yeah, let's watch it. I want the full 1.5 to 2-minute opening credit sequence. It is so good. I don't know if the creative team was just sitting there and for like a year or two, they were going through all the criticism of Bridgerton Season 1 or 2 and they were like, fine, we're just going to make a masterpiece. But they did. Like literally everything is better in this season. I don't know how they did it. I also want to talk about some story beats. Now, in the first 2 seasons, a lot of the romance drama did feel contrived. This is a big criticism of these first 2 seasons. I didn't mind this as much. I feel like that's just a genre convention for these sort of romance stories. This sort of like, oh my God, these lovers can't be because of a miscommunication. And oh my God, if only they talked properly and talked well to each other. This season toys with that in a really profound way. When George and Charlotte meet, this is actually the first time out of the 3 seasons where the couple isn't at each other's throats. They see each other for who they are, and it feels like a genuinely romantic, authentic connection from the jump without any kind of like trashy conflict.
I'm a lady in distress. You refuse to help a lady in distress.
I refuse when that lady in distress is trying to go over a wall so that she does not have to marry me. I'm George.
And you're sitting there going like, oh, so what's the conflict going to be? A lot of the issues regarding race and forced relationships that you're expecting to come up seem like they're not even going to be relevant. George is sweet and emotionally mature and connected and genuinely gives her the option to leave if she doesn't want to be there. A really interesting subversion. However, when we next see George, he's yelly and shouty and rude and brash and obnoxious. And as a viewer, for a second, I went, oh my God, are we doing this whole like enemies to lovers contrived thing again, where people behave with no emotional consistency or logic just for drama for the show? However, the subversion here, the twist here is it's not actually doing that. It's not trying to make him a dick. It's not trying to be an enemies to lovers story. You actually end up finding out that he is severely mentally unwell, and a lot of his mood flips and a lot of this turmoil that he takes out on other people is a direct result of that mental illness. And the way they pull this off in episode 4, going back on every single conflict, every single irrational moment that felt like lazy writing, and instead showing that this is a calculated move from the writers to make you feel like Queen Charlotte, to put you in her position, to feel how erratic and out of place these outbursts feel from George, is an absolute masterstroke of writing. Episode 4 was genuinely like blowing my mind for a substantial chunk of its runtime. So yeah, just to summarize, it really did feel like they were making George a dick out of nowhere just to contrive drama like they did in the first 2 seasons, but instead it ends up being this really serious problem that the characters need to navigate and get through, and it's moving and haunting and tragic and sad. It's so good. There is so much substance here and tragedy here that just weren't in these first 2 seasons at all. I love Anthony and Kate's slow burn in season 2. I love how drawn out that was. But really, like, when they're yelling at each other and going, "You vex me, I hate you," a lot of it, I'm sort of sitting there like, okay, like you're telling me that. I'll take your word on it, but I don't feel that based on what I've seen. I'm taking your word for it. But in this season, all the tragedy, all these moments where people are screaming at each other to say, "Tell me you love me, I'll be here for you," just feels so earned and so well done and so well realized.
From the moment I saw you trying to go over the wall, I have loved you desperately. I cannot breathe when you are not near. I love you, Charlotte. My heart calls your name.
As all good prequel series should do, this informs characters moving forward. These previous moments with King George's deteriorating mental health, I thought were just early onset dementia in Bridgerton season 1 or 2. But now, knowing the full tragic backstory behind them, these moments are going to hit so much harder. And I feel like season 3 is going to have some serious tragedy relating to Queen Charlotte and King George. Also, this season is way funnier. The first season only had 1 or 2 laughs, the main one being a delivery of a line from Anthony. The second season, I really don't even remember any substantial laughs. This season, hilarious. Queen, when she comes in and goes, "Virgins to the left of me, whores to the right," hilarious.
I wish it did, that they might get ideas to marry and start fornicating.
Mother!
Perhaps then I might have legitimate grandbabies. Instead, virgins to the left of me, whores to the right.
I believe I am a married woman.
Yes. And where are your babies?
I love all the Queen's kids in the modern day, how they're all just basically massive man whores. Also, King George's mum, the woman from Game of Thrones, has a line about how I'm a woman, I don't remember things, when talking to the men that are pressuring her for information. Hysterical, like genuinely got a really good belly laugh out of me. Also, can I just say, an incredible performance from King George's mum as well. The performances this season were going absolutely off. Looking through the main cast, I was stunned to see that basically the main 3 players are young Queen Charlotte, young King George, and young Lady Danbury. This is basically the first major production they've been in. Their credits are literally like 3 movies or TV shows long. They haven't done that much work. They're basically nobodies, and they are crushing it in this show. I genuinely thought they must be like seasoned British actors. They are that good. The actress that plays the young Queen Charlotte has all the modern Queen Charlotte mannerisms down to an absolute T. It feels like she studied this performance and really kind of embodied it. On top of that, young Lady Danbury does the exact same. They feel like these characters, just younger. It's a really staggering achievement in performance, honestly. On top of that, even side characters feel substantial. In the first 2 seasons of Bridgerton, there are side characters that you spend time on and you feel the momentum of the show just completely drop. Mainly, I'm thinking of Marina in season 2, as well as some of the Bridgerton brothers, but in this season, the side characters are incredible. So let's talk about Brimsley and Reynolds. So when this romance was introduced, I was really worried it wasn't going to be explored well or properly, because this show has done that a few times with other romances, and I thought if you're going to finally have a gay romance, do it well. When it was first introduced, I was really worried we weren't going to get much character development, particularly on Reynolds. Oh my god. This basically feels like a silent movie romance. So much is communicated just through looks between these two, because they literally can't talk in front of who they work for. Reynolds is the assistant to the king and Brimsley is assistant to the queen, so they can't communicate directly in front of them. They have to do little eye looks and little gazes. It is so well done. On top of that, the way their facial performances work in their relationships to their masters, the way that Reynolds, for example, gives looks towards King George, gives looks towards Queen Charlotte, as well as about them, is just so well done. There's so much visual storytelling done here. I love the moment where he looks at the letter, looks at Brimsley, looks back at King George. There is so much being communicated here. I love when Reynolds actually reaches out to King George to calm his nerves. In that moment where every other guard in the room starts breaking their eye line to snoop on King George and his mental illness. An absolutely fantastic moment. So much achieved here with a non-verbal acting performance. And I absolutely love the parallel that comes up later with Brimsley going to reach out to Queen Charlotte and realizing it's not the right thing to do. Now, if you've seen this season, you know how absolutely devastating the ending of this season is. I was genuinely expecting going into this King George dying in the modern day. I thought that was going to be the big emotional thing people were talking about. But instead, we just get something that is so sweet and so emotionally powerful that you can't help but be brought to tears. On top of that, it is built off another super sweet emotional moment. Now, previously in Bridgerton season 1 and 2, these relationships are built off people being awful to each other, mean misunderstandings, toxic behavior. But here, the love that is shown is so pure and so heartfelt and so emotional. So much of it is communicated just through like feeling their love rather than these like physical displays. And I think that's why the endings to all three substantial romantic relationships here are so powerful. The scene with Lady Danbury saying goodbye to Violet's dad is really effective and tragic, knowing that he opened her eyes to what love, sex, and romance could be. On top of that, the ending to Reynolds and Brimsley absolutely broke my heart. Even if Reynolds isn't dead and they just had to be separated due to work, the fact that Brimsley looks back on their romantic relationship with so much regard that he starts dancing alone, imagining dancing with Reynolds, is absolutely heartbreaking. I'm tearing up just talking about it. I was already an emotional wreck watching that moment. If you've seen the show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Nothing could prepare me though for the scene with Queen Charlotte bursting in to tell the good news to King George in the modern day that they're going to have a grandchild, seeing that King George is skitzing out and having a mental breakdown and getting under the bed the way they did 40, 50 years earlier. I'm tearing up just talking about it. Such a powerful, haunting, tragic scene. Like, I can't explain it any better than how the show did it, but I love all the moments they flash forward and flash back to the current and past versions of them under the bed. Just such a well executed sequence, just such a perfect note to end the show on. Like, absolutely fantastic. And the shot of their two little sets of feet under the bed, like, I'm tearing up just thinking about it. Like, genuinely powerful. Me and my girlfriend were an absolute wreck watching this season. I genuinely think this is like fantastic top tier television. I don't know where this fucking came from. There's so much good stuff here. Even the side plot about Lady Danbury being basically groomed and sent off from the age of 3 to this guy, you know, and has to experience like marital sex as chore work for her whole life is an absolutely tragic story that could make for a really compelling season in itself if they want to do that. I know in this season it's handled like a bit of a punchline, but there's a seriously dark and tragic feeling that comes to this story that comes after the revelation, after he passes away. I also think with Brimsley and Reynolds, it's really interesting to think, and the fact that they know so much about the people that they take care for and work for, but these people know pretty much nothing about them. They have a whole romance going on behind the scenes that these people never pick up on. And that's shown when Queen Charlotte asks if he's ever been in love. And you're sort of sitting there wondering how that would go if Brimsley actually revealed to her that he was gay, because back then that was a hangable, punishable offense. I just want to stress, I really did enjoy those first 2 seasons of Bridgerton, but for me, those are recommendations based on if you think you would like this show, check it out. If you're into fun, light romance stories, Bridgerton is sort of an elevated version of that in my opinion. But Queen Charlotte is absolutely must-watch television. Like, genuinely, if you have not seen it, go watch it immediately. But genuinely, going into season 3, I'm actually kind of nervous as to whether they are going to be able to pull this off the same way they pulled off Queen Charlotte. Maybe I shouldn't go in with the same expectations, but here's hoping they pull off something just as good. Thank you so much for watching. I will be covering the first half of season 3 of Bridgerton, which comes out in like 6-7 hours, and that should be out tomorrow. Aside from that, please check out my playlist full of my other Bridgerton videos, as well as my channel. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day.